All right, everybody, welcome to the November Tradition Meets Innovation call. For those who do not know me, my name is Angie. I'm the Product Training and Development Manager here at RIMAN. I always love these calls and just reading the couple minutes that we have in the waiting room where everyone's introducing themselves, saying where they're from. I saw Tim Hare's on the call. We have Tara Truax, Natalie Bacon, all these great names, all these different places. I even saw someone from Hong Kong. So such an honor to teach y'all a little bit more about the RIMAN product philosophy from, of course, that more scientific standpoint. So for those of you who are not familiar with our Tradition Meets Innovation calls, these happen on the third Wednesday of each month when we're not doing Product University. And so we had one last month, we are also going to have one next month, and then Product University is going to start again at the beginning of the year. So look out for more information on that. But today's topic is so important. And it's something that even I didn't fully understand how important it was until I really began to understand it and even, of course, discuss it with HQ members. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and I hope you enjoy and learn something new. All righty. So as of course we had advertised on the flyer, today's call is going to be about nanoliposomes. Not only nanoliposomes and how they interact with our skin, but also looking at nanoliposomes and how we're creating them with the microfluidizer processor. There are a variety of different ways to create liposomes, but the utilization of the microfluidizer processor is an extremely unique tool really in utilizing this and utilizing nanoliposomes for our products. So of course, to understand why we're using liposomes, how they're interacting with our skin, we have to look at the skin. So this might be something that you are familiar with, the schematic of the different layers of the skin. But for those who are not familiar, we have three distinct layers of skin. The top layer is our epidermis, we have the central layer of the dermis, and then the bottom layer is the hypodermis. And specifically with topical skincare, we do not address this bottom layer, this hypodermis. This is made up of fat cells and blood vessels, and so we want to make sure that things are not going in that area because that means that an ingredient can go systemic. So when you are applying products to your skin, whether it's your body skin or your facial skin, traditionally it's going to interact with that top layer, the epidermis, or it's going to go into the dermis itself. And of course, that depends on the delivery mechanism and even the viscosity of your product. So all of this to say, what's really important to note, of course, is when we look at the epidermis, it's made up mainly of keratinocytes and melanocytes. These keratinocytes are your skin cells. Basically, they are the skin cells that already have a nucleus. They are alive and they're full in their size. As these keratinocytes mature, as they go through that skin cell cycle, eventually moving to the top and then sloughing off your skin, they become corneocytes. And these corneocytes create your stratum corneum. Your stratum corneum is something we mentioned a little bit in Product University and actually also in last TMI when we talked about hydration. But this stratum corneum is the uppermost layer of your epidermis, and it's more well known as your skin barrier. And your skin barrier, as I often stress, is crucial. You need it to be intact with not only cells that have all their water content, but also you have the surrounding lipid environment, that mortar that keeps the bricks together. And so these in conjunction help not only keep hydration in, but they keep irritants from penetrating on the external or the environment side. And so oftentimes, of course, when you're applying products, it's going on your epidermis. And sometimes these products will stay in those first layers. They'll stay kind of interacting with that stratum corneum or even the very top layer of dead skin cells. And that is not a bad thing. You want your products to interact with these different layers because there are different things going on in these layers. Of course, with that skin barrier, you're having that protection, that hydration, and that lipid content. And then when we go deeper into the dermis, that's where a lot of our structural support comes from. So your dermis contains, of course, blood vessels, it has your hair follicles, but it also has your collagen bundles and your elastin, your fibronectin, your fibroblasts, the things that give your skin its structural support, its plumpness, its elasticity. Most notably in the dermis is your extracellular matrix. So the extracellular matrix, or ECM, essentially refers to all that stuff outside of the cell. So things like the collagen, like hyaluronic acid, and other hydrating molecules. And so when you have products that are meant to target the dermis, traditionally these are medical grade products because they've traveled through multiple layers of the skin, but they are mainly going to address specific areas of hydration that are lodged within the dermis, or of course your collagen and elastin stores. And so, with that all in mind, and understanding that we're really looking at the epidermis and the dermal interaction when you're applying topical products, now we will take a look at our emulsions, the products we're putting on. So, this is probably the most cosmetic sciencey thing we've addressed to date, and I cannot stress enough that you don't need to know this to talk about RIMAN, but I think it gives a really good starting point to then talk about liposomes, because liposomes in a way very much mimic emulsions and mimic the molecules that are created by emulsions. So when you go to appreciate your skincare, you have your serums, your boosters, your mists such as the Biotin oil mist, you have your anhydrous stick balms like your Biotin multi-stick balm, but then you have your emulsions. So all three products in the Radiansome 100 line can be considered emulsions. But another concept of an emulsion is the active cream. So cosmetic emulsions essentially are mixtures of two or more liquids that are thought to be immiscible or unmixable. For example, when you go to create your salad dressing and you have your vinegar and your oil and you shake it to mix it for a period, you are manually emulsifying those two liquids to create one homogeneous mixture. And of course, if you set down that bottle with the vinegar and the oil, it's going to eventually separate like you can see here. What's interesting to note is even emulsions exist in the foods we consume. Probably one of the most common ones I know of is mayo. Mayonnaise is an emulsion, and the emulsifier in that product, what helps keep those two separate mixtures permanently together, is egg yolk. So things like that is really unique to look at, that we're not only looking at cosmetics, but even in consumables, we have emulsions everywhere. But typically when we come to appreciate emulsions, it's just the general concept of a water and oil substance that is mixed together and maintained as a homogeneous mixture by the inclusion of an emulsifier. And again, a lot to know and things you don't need to know. But again, this is important to kind of really understand the dynamic possibilities of formulation and of formulation science. Not only can you have oil in water emulsions, you can have water in oil emulsions, and those are two different things, and they have different textures, different viscosities, and can create different interactions with the skin. You even have oil in water in silicone emulsions, in which now you are mixing three immiscible liquids together into a homogeneous liquid. All of that being said, if we look at the schematic below here, we of course start with our two immiscible liquids. We have water and we have oil. The mixing occurs in which we have the oil and the water now existing in a singular vat or a singular unit. And when you emulsify, the oil is trapped into the inner phase. And so when you emulsify or create an emulsification, you have an inner phase and an outer phase. And so in this instance, the outer phase is the water phase. The inner phase is the oil, and this will always maintain its homogeneity. This mixture, it will never separate because of the utilization of that emulsifier. And so something like an oil and water emulsion, when the oil is on the inner phase, typically has a luxurious break to the skin. As you're rubbing it in, that oil bursts, so to speak, microscopically, and you really feel those oils hydrating your skin. On the alternate, if you have a water in oil lotion, oftentimes those can feel extremely hydrating. As you're rubbing it into your skin, you're breaking that inner phase, which in this instance is water. And so you really get that quick burst of water hydration, so to speak. But all of that being said, there are so many different possibilities of creating different mixtures, especially even considering the difference in concentration of these liquids. If you have a larger water load and a smaller oil load, vice versa, that can also affect the viscosity of a product. So we could go on forever talking about the possibilities of creating emulsions, but what's important to note is that when you create emulsions, there are microscopic droplets as seen here. This is called a micelle. And so what the micelle is in this instance with an oil in water emulsion, is a droplet of oil protected from that outer water phase by a phospholipid layer. And so this phospholipid layers, as you see here, is created by these little phospholipids that are the emulsifier. So the emulsifier has a polar head and a nonpolar tail, and that nonpolar tail orients itself around that oil droplet because like attracts like, and that polar head, which is also, of course, water is polar, exists in that external environment. And so it protects the oil from otherwise separating or creating the distinct layers again. And so these droplets are typically 100 to 1,000 nanometers in size. And of course, the size of these droplets thusly depend on how these products interact with your skin. And if there are any ingredients in that interface, in that oil phase, that can also interact differently with the skin depending on the size of these droplets. So all of this is important to note specifically for this droplet that we've pointed out, this micelle. When we, though, finally come to appreciate how emulsions are actually absorbed, these large, thick emulsions, think like Eucerin, or I'm trying to think of something that's just a super thick, even thicker than the active cream, thicker than the microfluidizer cream. Super thick lotions tend to sit on top of the skin. The droplets are too large that when you break them, they really just fortify your stratum corneum, that top layer of your epidermis. And that's good. That is activity that we want, that reinforces your skin barrier, keeps hydration in, protects it from irritant penetration. But when we're looking towards other activities, you want to address hyperpigmentation, fine lines and wrinkles, you also need droplets that are smaller so that they can go further into the skin. That's why you tend to have products of differing viscosities in your routine. You might have a sprayable booster, a serum, and then of course a cream to finish, because each of these have smaller and differing sizes of droplets that can interact with the skin. So as I've said here, serums or thinner creams tend to have smaller droplets, which can enhance absorption. It can go a couple layers deeper into the epidermis to begin addressing layers beyond the stratum corneum. Furthermore, as I've mentioned, when you rub in an oil in water emulsion or a water in oil emulsion, oftentimes what that can do is actually leave an ingredient to fend for itself. Basically, once you break the emulsion into your skin, some of those ingredients are not going to be able to accurately penetrate into the cell or into its desired environment because it's not carried by anything anymore. It's otherwise been freed to the environment because you have mechanically broke that droplet, that micelle. And so this is also something to note when you are considering ingredients, in considering their delivery and how robust you want that delivery to be, where you want that ingredient to travel. And so with that in mind, and again, I'm going to go back just quickly to highlight that ingredient, that micelle, which is the phospholipid layer surrounding a nonpolar environment, we now can drop to liposomes. So liposomes were actually initially introduced in the pharmaceutical industry as a mechanism of enhancing the transdermal absorption of topical medications. And the reason I kept pointing out that micelle, which is involved in emulsions, which we come in contact with every day, whether you have salad dressing or your active cream, we are looking at the liposome now in the sense that it has not only one, but two phospholipid layers. So with the micelle in an emulsion, you have one phospholipid layer that is protecting that oil droplet or that inner phase from the outer phase. In this instance, the phospholipid bilayer is interacting with itself. The non-polar tails of those phospholipids are facing each other, and this entire area essentially creates one environment. And this environment is non-polar. This is where you can put oil-soluble ingredients, is in this environment. Then, of course, you have the polar heads facing inwards, which creates a small capsulated polar environment inside the liposome, protected entirely from the external phase. And in this water phase, you can put water-based ingredients that are intended to be deposited into the cell. So the liposome not only is able to carry both water-soluble ingredients and oil-soluble ingredients, but it is able to actually resemble the cell membrane because of this phospholipid bilayer structure. When you go to the emulsion, when you just have a singular layer of phospholipids, you are restricted to what ingredients are on your interface. It has to match the polarity of your interface. So if you have an oil on the interface, you can only deposit oil-soluble ingredients. But here we are able to not only have both oil and water-soluble ingredients in a liposome, but we're able to more accurately deposit that ingredient to the skin cell because it matches the cellular membrane. Skin cells and their cellular membrane itself is made up of a phospholipid bilayer. And so this allows the liposome to attach to a cell and to easily drop off an ingredient as a sort of vehicle, so to speak. Furthermore, if a liposome were to break apart and not successfully deliver an ingredient, those lipids themselves can actually also refortify your stratum corneum and your lipid layer, which is that environment surrounding the cells. And so liposomes are just fantastic. Not only are they born from kind of medical ingenuity, but they have fantastic possibilities for ingredient deposition and to also just maintain the general health of the skin. And so in appreciating them in the cosmetics realm, liposomes are most often used to not only enhance the retention of active ingredients, but to enhance your formula stability. And of course, most importantly, as I've mentioned, they enhance physiological durability. This is a lot, but what do each of these things mean? So first, with that first topic of enhancing the retention of active ingredients, with the purposeful inclusion of ingredients into these liposomes, you can maintain those ingredients in their whole form, their whole molecular form, further as it travels into the skin. Certain times you have ingredients, probably one of the most notable I would say is vitamin C, that are extremely unstable. And so a lot of times vitamin C will actually be liposomally encapsulated so that it can stay as a stable active ingredient as it travels through the skin. But furthermore, when I actually jump to this third point of enhancing physiological durability, this looks at the stability of a whole for a formula. Oftentimes, when you look towards the inclusion of an ingredient for a desired benefit to the skin, many times the absorption of that ingredient is hindered because the actual outer phase, the actual formula itself, is not a good carrier. And so with the inclusion and utilization of liposomes, you are able to enhance the entire durability of the formula itself, making sure not just one ingredient, but many ingredients reach their target areas and do not degrade as they travel through the skin. And so with that in mind, enhancing formula stability is crucial. If you have an unstable formula, not only can you not predict the efficacy of the formula, you can't predict the safety of the formula. You don't want raw materials just existing on their own or, in direct contact with a specific area if it was not initially intended to. And so oftentimes, liposomes are utilized to actually decrease the therapeutic effect of certain ingredients that on their own would not reach their target areas and would actually hinder something within the skin because it didn't reach its target area. And so as you can see here in this schematic, there's a variety of different ways in which liposomes can interact with the skin. You can have a liposome that is essentially created to have a sustained release of a material or of an ingredient. This is typically seen in the pharmaceutical application of liposomes, where you have a sustained release of a medication. The second possibility of a liposome's interaction with the skin is membrane fusion. And that's what I mentioned on the previous slide, in which the mimicking of the cell membrane that the liposome has is able to just essentially attach to the cell and let all these ingredients enter the cell. And so we also have deformation, where it just travels through the skin as a whole intact liposome, and then follicular uptake, where it actually travels to lower layers of the skin via the hair follicle. All of these are so many different possibilities. And again, this goes beyond the the cosmetic realm and also into the medical realm. So specifically in the appreciation of liposomes, we are just looking not only for an enhanced absorption of ingredients, but enhanced formula stability. So, my light just turned off. So really we are appreciating a formula that is targeted and it's efficacious, but it is also safe. And so we come to appreciate Radiansome 100 in our discussion of liposomes. So Radiansome 100, that 100 stands for 100% liposomal. Every single ingredient, every corner of this formulation is not only a liposome, it's a nanoliposome. And so We wanted to create a product that not only was genuinely efficacious and was reaching the targeted areas that we wanted to target, but that it was still safe in its targeted efficacy. And so with these three products, we specifically tout that they are microfluidized. You have your microfluidizer toner, your ampule, and your cream, but that itself has a connotation that is extremely unique to RIMAN's formulation technology, but extremely novel as well. And so that microfluidization is a specific mechanism to utilize to create those nanoliposomes. And there are a couple of other ways to create nanoliposomes, but microfluidization specifically was also still mainly used in the pharmaceutical industry. So alone, RIMAN just using a microfluidizer processor is extremely novel. But we went, of course, above and beyond and made a 100% microfluidized formula, which is even more unique. And I'll express that more on the next slide. All right, more in-depth science for y'all, and I'm actually going to turn the light on really quick. Ooh. So with that all in mind, when we go to look at the microfluidizer processor, this is an extremely complex piece of machinery. And so what it does is it functions on Bernoulli's principle. And for those of you that saw my RIMAN days from this week, this might be familiar to you. But Bernoulli's principle is a physics principle revolving around the idea that exposing a starting media to extremely high pressure and then drastically decreasing that pressure will drastically increase the velocity or speed of that starting media. And so we utilize that to force a formula into nanoliposomes, and we do it through this system. So you start with your starting media. In this instance, we would just put in a raw Radiansome formula. That's the Radiansome toner formula going into this starting container. It is then flown through the microfluidizer processor, at which it is exposed to extremely high pressure at the intensifier pump. As it continues to travel through the microfluidizer processor, that pressure is drastically decreased and the speed is drastically increased of that formula and of the particles in that formula. And that speed and all those fast particles move into the interaction chamber. This interaction chamber is extremely unique because you can actually modify what it looks like geometrically inside. And so what's unique to us is our specific pattern of that the geometry in the interaction chamber. Other companies will have a different geometry to create different nanoliposomes or different sizes of liposomes. We have a specific one that allows us to create those nanoliposomes of entire formulas. And so when it's in this interaction chamber, not only is it hitting the walls of the specific geometry in that interaction chamber, but they're also hitting each other. And something called cavitation occurs. Basically, the media just starts to form these tight little microscopic molecules, these nanoliposomes. And you're left with, of course, the end media being a nanoliposome. And so as you can see here, your starting media can be anything. It can be a lotion, a toner, an ampule, as we all know with the Radiansome formulas. And the starting size can vary vastly. But in this specific instance or the specific example, we have a starting media of 500 microns. By the end, after going through the microfluidizer, it starts at 740 nanometers. So just microscopically smaller in size. And so not only can you see that in this graphic, but you can also see how uniform they are in size. And that too is important in the uniform deposition and absorption of ingredients into the skin. All of this being said, such technology and utilization of this for entire formulas is extremely costly, very time consuming, and difficult for large formulas. The utilization of the microfluidizer processor is still utilized mainly on an ingredient by ingredient basis. For a cosmetic company to have a microfluidized product, it typically is in the formula at an ingredient or two. Maybe 5 to 10% of it is microfluidized. A lot of times medical grade products will do this, well, they'll have one main performing active microfluidized for absorption. Otherwise, it's still typically used in the pharmaceutical industry. It is very rare to not only see multiple ingredients that are microfluidized, but an entire formula microfluidized, and one that is stable. And so that is crucial as well. We wanted to make sure that we employed this cool technology, but that we maintained a formula that was usable and still efficacious upon application to the skin. Thusly, the creation of the Radiansome 100 nanoliposomes. So that microfluidizer processor creates those nanoliposomes of entire formulas. This not only enhances absorption of these formulas, but enhances efficacy in kind. What I mean that, or by that, excuse me, is, for example, say you wanted to address hyperpigmentation. And if you'll remember, the melanocytes are the cell types that create melanin or pigment, and they sit at the bottom layer of your epidermis just before you begin to travel into the dermis. And when you're wanting to address something with hyperpigmentation, you're either addressing the melanogenesis pathway, that creation of melanin, or you're addressing melanin deposits. And so something like a nanoliposome can help you bring an ingredient to those areas in the skin to have the genuine efficacy. And so that's something that's just astronomical in terms of performance while still maintaining an otherwise stable formula. So, as I've mentioned, the geometry of the interaction chamber can differ depending on who's using the microfluidizer processor. And so we have this very simplified schematic of what goes down when we put in a Radiansome product into that microfluidizer. They begin running through that specific geometry, they're interacting with the walls and with each other, and they're forcing themselves into not only smaller microscopic molecules, but molecules of even size as well. And so as you can see, once they are finished running through that processor, it creates molecules that are 1/350th the thickness of a human hair. It is that small. It is imperceptible to the naked eye, but so crucial and very perceptible to the efficacy you see on your skin. And so I was talking to one of my mentors who himself is actually a product developer, has been in the industry for a very, very long time, and he often interfaces with a variety of different manufacturers. And when he brought up the concept of microfluidization to one of his longtime manufacturing partners, that partner was extremely impressed that we employed it, not only for the entirety of a product, but at a relatively affordable price. Something like this typically could go 200s, 300s for one product alone. But we, of course, are looking for efficacious, safety, and attainable luxury. And so with the Radiansome 100 line, you get this proprietary technology at a budget that many people can appreciate. And so I finish with this note, and it's a question I get all the time, and it's a valid question. If nanoliposomes are so important and they're so unique to absorption and to delivery, why isn't the Dermatology EX line 100% liposomal? There are a variety of different reasons as to why, but I want to stress that despite the fact that it's not 100% liposomal, no line is more or less efficacious than the other. Both the lines are efficacious for different reasons, for different skin types, and so each person will find a home with one of the lines that is guaranteed. But when we look towards the question of why aren't there liposomes in the Dermatology EX line, the first is texture and application as the reason. The decision to use a liposome in your formula can not only impact the texture, but the absorption rate of a product. With the Dermatology EX products, the booster, the serum, and the active cream, all three products are extremely high in that Byungpul leaf extract. If you can remember, the booster is 88% Byungpul leaf extract, the serum 81%, and the active cream 57%. We want these to be water rich and to be quickly absorbing. If we included those liposomes, the formulas would have to be more oil rich to maintain the stability of those liposomes. That inherently would actually cost the Dermatology EX line its quick absorbing and water rich light texture that it currently has. Furthermore, the actual ingredients in the products, in the Dermatology EX products, don't really need the liposomes for absorption. Most of the time, the water-rich ingredients in the water-rich environment have water as a carrier, and that suffices to bring these ingredients towards the areas that matter. And so, as you can see with the second point, ingredient compatibility. Some active ingredients may work synergistically, others may not. And sometimes you simply don't need it for a formula to otherwise be absorbed into the skin. And so with the Dermatology EX line, you have things like hyaluronic acid, of course, the Byungpul, you have various vitamins and antioxidants. all that are water soluble in a water-rich environment. That is the perfect story on its own. It's not to say that certain ingredients in any of these products aren't liposomal, but that is merely by design and by raw material sourcing. The 100% liposomal nature is exclusive to the Radiansome 100 line because that line is much more oil rich. You have that expectation of not only the application and that sensation, but of course of that slower absorption and of the advanced nature of that line. You want that targeted activity for hyperpigmentation or to reduce the appearance of fine lines and wrinkles. And with that, we end our discussion on nanoliposomes. And I completely acknowledge that this was dense. There was a lot of information, a lot of fantastic information, but stuff you might not think about every day. And I totally understand that. What's most important to take away from this is the novelty of the microfluidization process and the fact that RIMAN has employed it in the entirety of our Radiansome 100 lines. This allows us to not only reinforce the difference, the RIMAN difference we always talk about, but to reinforce our commitment to technology. And so on the flyer, I put, let's talk about the main concept of tradition meets innovation. And when we say tradition meets innovation, we're often talking about the traditional being our heritage ingredients, that Jeju lava energy water and the byungpo leaf extract. And when we talk about the innovation, it's about nanoliposomes. It's about the microfluidization because it is so key and so crucial in not only setting us apart, but experiencing that difference with our product lines. And so I thank you so much for the patience of listening to me take you through a cosmetic chemistry course, but I hope that it allows you to appreciate your products a little bit more, even understanding viscosities and emulsions. Maybe you want to go make some of your own mayonnaise, I don't know, but I hope this was an enjoyable call for you. And without further ado, I will see you next month for the next TMI call. See you then.